Today, I will be exploring the many factors that affect and shape Kamiak Butte, a high point in the Palouse Hills region. To begin, I will look at the geologic makeup of the butte. I will then go over the climate interactions and biome of the butte. I will follow this with data collected in a field report from the butte. Finally, I will take a look at fungi on the butte and how they help to shape the ecosystem. When looking at the geologic makeup of the butte, it is first important to look at the large-scale processes that form not only the butte, but the continent it lays on. Supercontinental drift theory was first proposed by the German scientist Alfred Wegener in 1912 and was accepted in the 1950s and 60s. This theory states that the continents actually move. This was observed to be true through the process of seafloor spreading, which occurs through volcanic activity and ocean ridges, which create new oceanic crust and push outward, effectively subducting old crust into trench zones. Specifically looking at Kamiak Butte, we go back 70 million years when the Baja BC exotic was led into eastern Washington. Fast forward to only 50 million years ago and we begin to see the emergence of what Pullman is now. This occurred as the Juan de Fuca plate subducted underneath the North American plate, effectively pushing it upwards and creating new land. From 100 to 50 million years ago, this land was solely sedimentary quartz sand. Over time, however, these sands turned to sandstone and eventually became quartzite through warping, heating, and compression. 17 million years ago, processes occurred leading to lava reaching the surface and eventually solidifying as basalt. The flood basalt spread across eastern Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. Over this area, the flood basalts covered the entire landscape underneath 2 to 3 miles of lava. As a result, the once mountainous landscape became extremely flat. Only the tallest peaks were able to outreach the basalt, one of which was Kamiak Butte. Because the landscape was covered with 2 to 3 miles of hardened basalt, it lowered elevation by compressing the lithosphere. The most recent ice age occurred from 2.6 million years ago to 11,711 years ago. During this ice age, an impossible glacial lobe with a thickness of 3,000 feet along the Clark Fork River in Montana made it impossible for the heightened water flow to pass. The result of this was the creation of the glacial Lake Missoula, a 190-mile-long lake that has 3 glacial lobes. After breaking through the wall of ice, water quickly rushed through Lake Pend Oreille and into the Columbia River, where it then spread across the landscape. After this, the water reached another glacial lobe, where the Grand Coulee Dam stands in the modern day. From here, the water rushed southwest until it reached the Wallula Gap, where the water quickly built up to 1,200 feet deep, creating Lake Lewis. When this lake was alleviated, sediment fell to the bottom of the lake as water flowed down and out through the Columbia River. This flood happened not once, but an estimated dozens, if not hundreds of times, each taking a different path depending on its size and conditions, leaving us with what is now known as the Scablands. Soils, debris, and organic matter from eastern Washington, Idaho, and Montana began to accumulate at the Wallula Gap. These were eventually blown into the Palouse region to create low soil that covered the flood basalts up to 40 feet high. Transitioning to climate interactions on the Butte, it is first important to note that the sun is the driving force of weather and climate on the planet. The ocean also has large influences of the global climate due to it containing 97% of the planet's water and covering 71% of its surface. Finally, clouds are critical in determining the climate for a region as they are one of the biggest albedo sources on the planet. Macroclimate is the broad-scale climate of a large region within a continent and is where weather fronts occur. On Kamiak Butte, marine polar air masses from Alaska contain a lot of humidity that can mix with cold, dry continental polar air masses and result in large amounts of snowfall and severe temperature drops. Kamiak Butte's mesoclimate resides in the Palouse Hills. For every 1,000 feet of elevation you gain, the temperature drops by 3.6 degrees. Kamiak Butte lays at 3,641 feet tall, which, compared to Pullman's elevation of 2,352 feet, means at its peak it has a temperature that is about 5.5 degrees cooler. The monthly temperature average for Kamiak Butte can be seen in the figure to the right. When the temperature goes below 40 degrees, plants stop photosynthesizing, which occurs on Kamiak Butte from November until March. As air masses are pushed over terrain to a higher elevation, it cools down dramatically. This causes much of the water vapor and clouds to be released in these mountainous regions. As clouds reach the other side of the mountain, they sink and heat up, making it more able to hold water as vapor. This is called the rain shadow effect. The air mass responsible for Kamiak Butte's climate goes over two mountain ranges before rising over the continental gradient. Ultimately, Kamiak Butte receives an average annual rainfall of 19.04 inches. From the marine polar air mass, Pullman receives cool and moist air that travels over from Alaska. Much of this moisture, however, is affected by the rain shadow effect. Kamiak Butte has both a southern-facing aspect and a north-facing aspect. Because the butte lays in the northern hemisphere, the south-facing aspect gets a lot more direct sunlight in the spring and summer. This increased sunlight affects the transpiration on the side of the butte. Ultimately, the northern aspect receives less direct sunlight and as a result has much more diverse and abundant vegetation. Kamiak Butte lays in the western interior shrubland and woodlands biome. The Palouse is a variation of this biome. This is due to the geologic history of the Palouse. Firstly, the flood basalts that covered most of the Palouse made water retention in soil much higher due to its highly impermeable structure. Additionally, the wind-blown lows mixed the Palouse region with rich nutrients in the soil. Kamiak Butte is primarily quartzite, which has a high permeability. As a result, water retention is much lower than the rest of the Palouse, making it a harder spot for much vegetation to grow. Further, the topography of the butte has massive impacts on the plant growth. The south-facing aspect of the butte, seen in the top image, gets a high number of solar rays and begins receiving intense solar radiation early in the spring. As a result, there is much less woody vegetation on this side of the butte. On the north-facing aspect of the butte, seen in the bottom picture, there is far less direct sunlight. As a result, plants of many varieties can thrive here. There have been many anthropogenic influences over the biome, many relating to agriculture. Much of the land has been plowed over to make way for crops such as wheat and barley. Domestic livestock raising also plays a huge role in the alterations made to this landscape. Not only does this reshape the vegetation over the land, but it results in differing nutrient cycling. Invasive species such as yellow star thistle that evolved under similar biotic regimes in places like Eurasia have been introduced to the western interior shrubland and woodlands biome. Lastly, humans have influenced wildfires throughout the biome. Humans spreading and suppressing fires through these lands reshape how they burn. This has led to many large-scale wildfires. The next section of this presentation is based on a field report from Kamiak Butte for March 31st, 2022. The mesoclimate for Kamiak Butte is the Palouse Hills region. This mesoclimate experiences dry, hot summers with little precipitation and cold, wet winters. Kamiak Butte has two specific microsites, the north-facing aspect and the south-facing aspect. There are various factors that affect these two sites, such as solar radiation and water availability. Because of the northern aspect's position, it receives much less annual solar radiation and thus has slower snowmelt, allowing plants to receive more water. On the northern side of the butte, there are three primary tree species, Douglas fir, western larch, and ponderosa pine. There are a variety of shade-tolerant flowers such as trillium, yellow bells, and fairy slippers. There are also various animal species that can be observed on this side of the butte, including red squirrels, nuthatches, and woodpeckers. Unlike the northern aspect of the butte, the southern-facing aspect receives much more annual solar radiation. This leads to the majority of yearly water availability slipping past the roots of plants and through the underlying permeable quartzite layer, making it inaccessible for plants. As a result, ponderosa pines are the only trees observed on this side of the butte. This is due to their drought-tolerant makeup. The southern side of the butte is primarily dominated by grasses. There are many stability factors affecting the butte. Firstly, fires are often self-extinguished by wetter fuels on higher elevations, thus keeping natural wildfires in check. Secondly, species have co-evolved on the butte and thus keep each other in check. The plants and trees on the butte have filled specific niches that allow them to survive in the dry, hot summers. Lastly, anthropogenic factors have affected Kamiak Butte. On the butte, the construction of roads, trails, houses, and many other structures have altered the butte. Wildfires are a natural factor on Kamiak Butte and are self-regulating. These wildfires also contribute to the ecosystem by providing valuable nutrients. Additionally, the burning of vegetation results in more space for other vegetation to take over and flourish. Humans have negatively influenced wildfires by unnaturally initiating them and putting them out. Fungi play a critical role in ecosystems in many ways. Fungi fall under the decomposers and transformers trophic level. This is a critical part of the food chain that breaks down dead organisms and waste materials and converts them into nutrients for producers. This causes many fungi to build symbiotic relationships with plants. In the photo to the right, a deer, typically a primary consumer, can be seen eating a mushroom on Kamiak Butte. This pushes the deer into the secondary consumer level as it consumes the primary consumer mushroom. Mycorrhiza is a fungal entity that has an extremely important symbiotic relationship with plants. Looking specifically at Kamiak Butte, mycorrhiza can reach to the depths of the soil and collect and provide nutrients otherwise unattainable by plants. There are two recognized classes of mycorrhiza, ectomycorrhiza and endomycorrhiza. Ectomycorrhiza help plants with the intake of phosphorus, ammonium, and zinc. Ectomycorrhiza take up zinc and phosphorus for the host plant through the formation of specialized absorptive organs that are called haustoria. Recent research by Washington State University and Fungi Perfecti LLC have explored the potential answer to the rapidly declining honeybee population. They found that a mushroom extract given to bees was able to greatly reduce virus levels. The exposure to these extracts led to a 79-fold reduction in the deformed wing virus, as well as an astonishing 45,000-fold reduction in the Lake Sinai virus. Both mushroom study can be found in the interior woodlands and shrublands biome, which Kamiak Butte lies within. As a result, these mushrooms prove to be an extremely critical component factor in the Kamiak Butte ecosystem. They can provide increased disease resistance to bees who are able to pollinate the plants on the butte.